All right, I wanted to expose you a little bit to some non-SQL databases. And I don't think too highly of MongoDB. At a certain scale, it's probably worthwhile, but that's a lot of computers running in replication. Cassandra, which is Facebook's internally developed database that their application runs on, is an instance of Cassandra. Again, at scale, from what I can tell with Cassandra, you need about 15 machines minimum to even break even. And probably realistically, you're talking about 30 plus dedicated computers to running it to make a decent Cassandra cluster. So if you've got an application that needs that kind of performance, and you've got a couple full-time system administrators and a couple full-time administrators for the database and the kind of funding to support that, that might be a wonderful thing. But there are no SQL databases that I use on a regular basis that have lots of capabilities that are very useful. And the first one of those is redis. Redis is an in-memory database, although it can save its data to disk so that you can recover its state. It does have an append-only mode. Now, I have on my Linux system here, I do not have it installed, so let's start with just installing it. I don't remember if it's redis or redis CLI. And did I know my own password? Probably not. All right, it's Redis, and do I want to continue? Yes, this will actually set up Redis, and it'll set it up on this system so that it starts when it boots. By default, Redis doesn't have any security. You can go in and tell it to use a password that's common to all connections, and it can have multiple databases, which are numbered, but the way to access Redis is there are libraries for lots of things, but Redis CLI, and it has really simple commands. It's got a bunch of them. We're going to take a look at different sets of commands here in a second, but if I set A to B, and then I get A, I get back B, which means that I can do something like set some key AA to some value, which is going to be like a piece of JSON data. And you notice that I do have to put in the command line version here, I have to put in backslashes to escape those quote marks. Now get AA, and I get back that piece of data. The data doesn't actually have the quote or backslashes in it. It is quoting it and escaping those with backslashes. Now, one of the amazingly useful things about Redis is that you can create keys that automatically disappear after a precise number of seconds. So if you have some temporary piece of data, and it's only supposed to be around for a little while, you can tell it how long to keep it before that key disappears. So I can set EX A for 5 seconds to a value of BBB. And now I can get A. And here in a few seconds, this guy is just going to automatically disappear. Now, it sounds like that isn't a very useful feature, but look at it this way. I'm doing a login process, and the person has, 2 minutes to be able to go from doing the first part of their login with their username and password and doing the two-factor authentication. And rather than having to have a separate process that goes back and cleans that up, I can turn around and say, just set the number of seconds on this key, and it automatically disappears. Now, you notice that the first time I got A, it returned a value. The second time, the 5 seconds has disappeared, and it just returns nil that it didn't get anything. There are libraries to interface to Redis in a slew of different languages. I tend to use Python, PHP, and Go a lot, and the libraries are very good. You're actually sending these commands through the library to Redis, so anything that you can enter here in their C command line interface, you can enter from your application. This also means that for debugging and looking what's going on in the database, in the Redis database, you've got a tool that allows you to quickly and easily poke into it and say, okay, my program did this. Did I actually get that in the database? yes, I got that, or no, I didn't, then, you would know where to look. So it makes development easy. Now, besides just this kind of key value pair, it's got a slew of capabilities. Redis is an in-memory data structure that's shared. And we'll take a look at some of the capabilities. But let me give you a quick story on Redis. There's a company out in Utah that I did some work for that basically does what Google does, but with pre-programmed searches. So that some institution like the University of Wyoming can find out anywhere it's mentioned on the web and keep a list of these searches and find any new or changed mentions anywhere on the web for like $35 a month. Okay, so as a marketing person, you want to be able to go out and see these things. You want to get a list of them. This is what they do. This means that they scrape the entire web. And this data goes into Postgres databases to be indexed. But when they scrape the web, they have a lot of data coming out from their web crawlers. And by a lot of data, we're talking something on the order of 60 to 65 terabytes an hour. And they need some way of packaging up that data and then distributing it to all of their Postgres databases. So in between the Postgres and the web scrapers, they have a Redis database. Yeah, a single Redis database that's getting input of 60 terabytes an hour and output as it's pulling these things out on the back end to a whole slew of Postgres databases. So as a buffer, as a cache, as a thing for keeping these keys and deleting them, for not keeping them around too long, it provides a phenomenal tool. I've also seen applications in Postgres where you take triggers, and the triggers watch certain tables that are high frequency, and instead of queries going directly to the database, because Redis is in memory and very fast, when you query this particular set of data, it goes to Redis, sees if it's there. If it isn't, then it hits the Postgres database. And if somebody updates it, there's an automatic feature in Postgres that allows you to catch the updates and send those back to Redis. So you can set like an hour timeout for this row of data, and you can have this high-speed cache that says that during that hour it'll keep it around, and if it's got it, it keeps it. It's a super way to do caching and gets you high speed. When we're talking high speed, a off-the-shelf instance of Postgres, you might get 50,000 transactions a second on a decent computer. An off-the-shelf, non-replicated copy of Redis, you can get 250 to 350,000 per second. It replicates really well, and the replication is easy. And you can easily scale Redis to 2 million requests per second. So, you can turn a regular database for some really hot data into something that you're getting 2 million requests per second. And that is a lot without a lot of effort. Okay? I mean, it's a couple days worth of programming to get these things to cooperate together. But this is not a mind-bogglingly difficult task. This is, okay, I'll just use Redis as a buffer in between. I'll work out the details. Here's the caching. And suddenly we've got some tremendous throughput. All right, let's take a look at the Redis website and see what kind of commands it has. I've gone to the redis.io website. That's the home for Redis. And it is free, although you can buy support for it. And if I click on documentation, there is right here the full list of commands. There's other documents. But it has things like access control lists for users so that it has a security system if you turn it on. There are things for doing bit fields, these B operations, so that you can have bit data. And by bit data, we're talking about bit strings that are hundreds of thousands of bits long. There are things for doing clustering. I think I mentioned it's easy to set up clusters. It has commands for sets and how you handle sets and copying data between different databases. It can have multiple databases. There is a dump for a key to see how you store it internally. It has its own internal implementation of a programming language. It uses Lua as the programming language. So if you don't have a command here, but you can combine a couple of them together to make a command, you can create your own extensions to it. There are stuff for getting hashes and how you do hash sets. There are things in here for doing increments and decrements of values, so it understands integers and strings. It has lists that are very fast. Generally speaking, all the things that you find in here are order 1 execution time. So it's list operations. You can add from or count the length of a list. You can get to either end of the list. You can push, you can pop, which means you can make stacks. You can trim off the end of a list. And all of those things are very fast. They're all order 1 operations. There are sets, okay, and persistent sets that you can say instead of a list, you want it to not have any duplicates in there, and it's a set of things. There is a way to use this as a communication tool, as a pub-sub center. One of the major chat applications behind the covers, what it's using for all of its connections is redis and pub-sub, and it has millions of users. There are things to do this entire set of stuff that starts with S is all the set stuff, like sadd, scard, which gets the number of elements in a set. Okay. There is a set of stuff for doing a stack, and also random values. So there's a big set of things that you can get it to do. And you can also keep stuff in a sorted set, which is an interesting thing. These Z operations are sorted sets. So you can do a lot of different kind of operations. There's a set of commands here. We're going to have a very brief homework to go do with redis. But basically, it's install it, go into the command line, go and play with some of the different kinds of things that you can do. And all of these commands are available through the libraries that you would use to manipulate redis. So redis is a tremendously useful NoSQL database for all sorts of things. The other alternative to something like redis, which isn't really a database, is memcached, which is also used as a performance memory cache. New York Times uses it for caching their web pages. But there are lots of other people, like Netflix, that use redis for caching data for their web pages. So there's these other kinds of uses that you don't normally think of as a database that it's really good for.